Hey guys, tonight we are heading deep into the heart of southern Africa, to a place that shouldn't exist according to the prejudiced eyes of early European explorers. We're traveling back in time to the majestic stone city of Great Zimbabwe. Picture a vast, rolling savanna, golden under the haze of the sun, dotted with colossal granite boulders stacked by giants. Then, rising from this very earth, are massive, curving walls of stone, elegant and silent, enclosing a kingdom that was once the bustling center of an empire. And spoiler alert, if you were dropped here in the 14th century without your fancy GPS and filtered water bottle, your main contribution to the ecosystem would be as a light snack for a crocodile. No offense. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always so interesting to see where everyone is tuning in from, so please feel free to drop your city or country and the local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is the first thing you notice. It's warm, thick, and carries the scent of dry grass, dust, and something else, something faintly sweet, like blooming acacia trees somewhere on the breeze. It shimmers above the ground, making the horizon wiggle and dance. You're standing on a wide open plateau, a golden green sea of savanna stretching in every direction. The sky above is a vast, unforgiving blue, a canopy so immense it feels like you could fall right into it. Your journey here has been a long one, not on a modern, rumbling tour bus, but on foot, following paths worn smooth by generations of traders, pilgrims, and farmers. For days, you've seen the signs of a powerful civilization drawing you closer. Neatly terraced hillsides, herds of fat, humped cattle grazing under the watchful eyes of young boys, and the distant, rhythmic sound of women grinding grain. You've been walking towards the strange, whale-backed hills, or kopjes, that litter this landscape. They are mountains of granite, weathered into smooth, fantastical shapes over millions of years. And it is from these very hills that the city is born. As you crest a small rise, you finally see it, and you stop. The sight doesn't make sense. It's not a city of wood, mud, or thatch, the kind you might expect. It is a city of stone. Directly ahead, sprawling across the valley, is a web of lower stone walls, creating dozens of circular enclosures. And beyond them, rising with an impossible, silent grace, is a monumental structure of dark, weathered granitea, huge, circular wall, so high and so perfectly curved, it seems to have been poured onto the landscape, not built. And high above it all, perched atop the largest kopje like a king on his throne, is another fortress of stone, clinging to the very rock it's made from. This is Great Zimbabwe, at the peak of its power in the middle of the 14th century. It's the capital of a vast Shona kingdom, a political and religious center that has been growing in wealth and influence for over 200 years. You are a visitor, perhaps a trader from the Swahili coast, bringing glass beads and fine cloth to exchange for gold and ivory. The scale of it is simply staggering. Forget your modern reference points. This is one of the largest ancient stone structures in all of sub-Saharan Africa. The builders here, the ancestors of the modern Shona people, had a deep, almost innate understanding of stone. They didn't use any mortar or cement to hold their walls together. It's a technique called dry stone construction. They simply quarried millions of granite blocks, expertly shaping them and fitting them together so precisely that they have stood for nearly 1,000 years. It's a testament to a level of patience that honestly feels a bit insulting to our modern sensibilities, where we give up on assembling a simple bookshelf if the instructions are even slightly confusing. You begin your slow walk down into the valley, towards the lower city. The sun is warm on your back, but not yet the searing heat of midday. The sounds of the city grow louder low, constant hum of life. You can hear the murmur of hundreds of voices, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the laughter of children, the lowing of cattle. Historians still argue whether the initial settlement was driven by a lucky gold strike, a shift in regional climate that favored this specific plateau, or the sheer political genius of a single, forgotten chief. Whatever the catalyst, the result was this: a thriving metropolis of up to 18,000 people, a nexus of trade that connected the African interior with the vast Indian Ocean network, reaching as far as China. As you draw nearer, you notice the profound simplicity and honesty of the place. It's reflected in its very name. The word Zimbabwe is believed to derive from the Shona phrase Zimba Zimbabwe, which translates, with a beautiful and almost comical directness, to houses of stone. No lofty, metaphorical titles like the Citadel of the Sun or the Gilded Throne of the Gods, just stone houses. There's an admirable, no-nonsense confidence in that, a quiet declaration that the work speaks for itself and needs no flowery embellishment. You've arrived at the edge of the sprawling settlement, the point where the wilderness gives way to civilization. The path widens, and you can see people moving purposefully between the circular stone enclosures that dot the landscape ahead. You can smell cooking fires now, a comforting, smoky scent that promises food and community. You take a deep breath, steeling yourself for the sights, sounds, and protocols of this powerful stone kingdom. Your journey has just begun. The path you follow isn't paved with grand flagstones, but with hard-packed, reddish earth, worn smooth and wide by a constant river of feet. You step past the first low, curving stone wall, and the world changes. The open savanna is gone, replaced by a winding, living labyrinth. You are now inside the lower city, or what archaeologists will one day call the Valley Ruins. This is the heart of the community, the home of the thousands of farmers, artisans, and laborers who form the bedrock of this powerful kingdom. The hum of the city you heard from a distance is now a rich symphony of sound, enveloping you completely. There is no grid system here, no rigid, straight roads intersecting at perfect angles. The layout is organic, almost alive, like the complex, branching structure of a coral reef. Circular stone enclosures branch off from meandering pathways, each one a self-contained world. The walls here are not like the colossal barrier of the great enclosure that looms in the distance. They are more modest, perhaps chest-high, or just a little taller, but constructed with the same patient, mortarless skill. They aren't meant for military defense. A determined person could easily scramble over one. Their purpose is more subtle, more social. These walls provide privacy in a densely populated city, separating the living spaces of one family or clan from another. They are stone lines drawn in the sand, declarations of identity and household, marking where one family's world ends and another's begins. It's the 14th century version of a white picket fence, just a bit more permanent, and probably better at keeping your neighbor's nosy goats out of your sorghum patch. You follow a main thoroughfare, a slightly wider path that seems to pulse with movement. People flow past you in both directions. Women walk with an effortless grace, carrying large clay pots of water on their heads. Men stride by with spears or farming tools resting on their shoulders, their conversations a low melodic murmur in the Karanga dialect of Shona. Groups of dusty children dart in and out of openings in the walls, their laughter sharp and bright. They're playing a game that involves a rolling gourd and a lot of shouting, a game that is probably ageless. You have to step aside as a man guides a small, humped cow through the crowd, its bell clanking a soft, rhythmic beat. The sheer density of life is overwhelming but not aggressive. It's a community moving with a shared, unspoken rhythm. As you walk, you peek into the enclosures. Each one is a self-contained family compound. Inside, you see the remains of the day's activities. A grinding stone sits idle near a doorway, remnants of white meal dusted around its base. A woman sits in the shade of a wall, meticulously weaving a basket from reeds. Most enclosures contain several circular platforms made of a clay-like substance. These are the foundations for their homes. Daga huts. Historians still argue whether this sprawling, complex layout was centrally planned or if it grew organically over centuries, with new families simply adding their own enclosure onto the existing maze. Was there a master architect? A grand vision? Or was it more like a vast, slow-motion game of Tetris, with family plots slotting in wherever they could fit? The air here is thick, with a different collection of smells. The sweet scent of acacia from the savanna has been replaced by the more immediate, more human smells of urban living. There's the ever-present, comforting aroma of wood smoke from cooking fires, the yeasty smell of fermenting grain for beer, the sharp, metallic tang from a blacksmith's forge somewhere nearby. And, well, there's no delicate way to put this. There's the smell of trash. One of the more fascinating and less glamorous archaeological features of Great Zimbabwe are the Middensta community trash heaps. Tucked away in specific areas, these mounds are a priceless record of daily life. If you were brave enough to get closer, you'd see a jumble of broken pottery shards with intricate designs, the discarded bones from countless meals of cow, goat, and maybe even a type of local fish, a chipped stone hoe, and the ash and charcoal raked out from hearths. It's in these mundane piles of garbage that the real, unfiltered story of a people is written. A bit like going through someone's recycling bin to figure out their life story, just with more cow bones and less existential dread. You notice the details of the craftsmanship all around you. Even here, in the common parts of the city, there is beauty and intention. A simple wall might have a decorative flourish, a row of stones laid in a neat herringbone pattern. A clay pot drying in the sun is incised with geometric lines, a design passed down through generations of potters. The city is a living testament to the fact that practicality and art don't have to be separate things. As you wander deeper into the warren of passages and courtyards, you feel a magnetic pull towards the two dominant structures you saw from the distance. To your left, the massive, perfect curve of the great enclosure seems to hum with a quiet, regal power. And high on the hill to your right, the stone battlements of the Acropolis look down on everything, silent and watchful. But you're not ready for those places yet. For now, you are content to be lost in the bustling, beautiful, and utterly normal world of the valley. A city made of stone and held together by people. You pause before a modest, semi-private opening in one of the lower stone walls, feeling the familiar mix of curiosity and politeness. A family compound. A man sitting just inside the opening, polishing a spearhead with sand, gives you a slow, permissive nod. You step through, and the sounds of the main path fade, muffled by the stone. You are now inside a family's personal world, and it is centered around one primary structure, the Daga hut. You've seen the foundations for them all over the valley-raised circular platforms of packed earth. Here, you see the finished product. The hut is round, perhaps 15 feet in diameter, with walls made from that same mixture of clay and gravel, known as daga. The material is wet when applied over a framework of wooden poles, and then it bakes hard under the African sun into a durable, almost ceramic-like shell. The roof is a steep cone of golden brown thatch, expertly layered to shed the heavy summer rains. It extends far out from the walls, creating a shady veranda that runs all the way around the hut, a perfect place to shelter from the midday sun, or to sit and work on crafts. The whole structure is beautifully simple and perfectly adapted to this environment. The thick daga walls absorb the heat of the day and slowly release it during the cool nights, making the interior temperature remarkably stable. It's a low-tech, genius form of climate control that modern architects with all their fancy software still struggle to replicate as elegantly. And here these people are, doing it with mud and sticks. Makes you think. A woman emerges from the hut, stooping slightly to clear the low doorway. She smiles a brief, welcoming smile and gestures for you to enter. Ducking your own head, you step across the raised threshold into the cool dimness inside. The air is smoky and earthy, and for a moment your eyes struggle to adjust from the bright sunlight. There are no windows, only the single doorway and a small opening at the peak of the roof to let smoke escape. The interior is a single, circular room. The floor is the same polished daga, smooth and cool under your feet. It's been burnished with dung and clay to a dark, glossy finish, which sounds a bit alarming to our modern hygiene standards, but was actually a practical way to keep dust down and repel insects. Please, don't try this at home with your polished hardwoods. I promise you, the results will not be what you're hoping for. As your eyes adjust, you begin to see the careful organization of the space. It's not just one big empty room. The interior is divided by low, molded daga partitions that rise gracefully from the floor. These aren't walls, but rather built-in furniture that segments the space into different zones for sleeping, cooking, and storage. In the very center is the hearth, a shallow, circular depression in the floor, lined with stones. The embers from the morning meal still glow with a faint orange light. Above it, a pot of something that smells like a hearty stew hangs from a hook suspended from the roof beams. To one side of the hearth is a raised platform, also made of daga, which serves as a bench for sitting during the day, and likely a sleeping platform at night, softened with woven mats or animal hides. On another side, a different raised structure has molded, circular hollows for holding large clay pots, a permanent, built-in shelf to keep precious water and grain safe and upright. This is a world of curves and circles. There are no harsh right angles here, nothing to interrupt the flow of the space. This design philosophy is echoed throughout Great Zimbabwe, from the huts to the massive enclosing walls. Historians still argue whether this circular motif has a deep spiritual meaning, perhaps reflecting a cyclical view of life and the seasons, or if it was simply a practical and strong building shape. But standing here, in this calm, enveloping space, it feels less like an architectural choice and more like a deeply ingrained worldview made solid. It's profoundly comforting and peaceful. You notice the small details of daily life. A carved wooden headrest lies on the sleeping platform, designed to preserve an elaborate hairstyle during sleep. Bunches of herbs are tied to the roof beams, drying in the smoky air for use in cooking or medicine. Tucked into a nook is a small collection of iron tools, a hoe blade, an axe head, and an awl. Everything has its place. It's a space of ordered efficiency, honed by generations of living in exactly this way. This would be home for an entire family. You imagine them at night, the fire in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the curved walls, telling stories, the sound of crickets, and the distant lowing of cattle drifting in from outside. It's intimate, very intimate. Personal space wasn't really a concept that had been invented yet. You'd know every single thing about your family members, probably far more than you'd ever want to. It's a stark contrast to our modern lives, where we can retreat into separate rooms, behind separate doors, into the glow of separate screens. Here, life is shared, constantly and completely. Stepping back out into the bright sunlight of the compound, you see the rest of the domestic scene. A smaller hut nearby might be a kitchen or a sleeping space for adolescent children. A tall, sturdy platform built on stilts is a granary, designed to keep the precious harvest of millet and sorghum safe from rodents and moisture. You nod your thanks to the family and step back out into the main thoroughfare, your head full of the quiet, smoky, and intensely personal world you just witnessed. The foundation of this stone kingdom isn't just stone, it's the rhythm of daily life inside these countless daga homes. Leaving the quiet domesticity of the family compound behind, you merge back into the gentle current of people flowing along the main path. The air changes again. The smoky, domestic smells are now mingled with something else, the faint, metallic scent of wealth. You're approaching the heart of the city's commerce, an area that, while not a formalized market square like you might picture in Europe, or the Middle East, serves the same bustling purpose. The pathways here are wider, and the crowds are thicker, a more cosmopolitan mix of people. You see local farmers, their hands calloused, and their conversations centered on rains and pastures. But you also see figures who are clearly not from this immediate region. A tall, lean man with sharp features and a brightly colored wrap is likely a trader from a neighboring territory, here to bargain for cattle. You even spot a few men whose light skin and fine, woven robes mark them as merchants from the Swahili coast. Men who have traveled hundreds of miles from cities like Kilwa or Sofala, bringing the goods of the wider world to this inland capital. The true source of Great Zimbabwe's power and wealth wasn't just its strategic location or its political strength, it was cattle. Before all else, this was a kingdom built on livestock. Cattle were the measure of all things, the primary signifier of wealth, the currency for trade, and the foundation of social contracts, like paying a bride price. The surrounding region, known as the Gutu, or cattle country, was perfect for grazing the large herds of indigenous Nguni cattle with their distinctive humps and long, lyre-shaped horns. A man's status was counted not in acres or coins, but in heads of cattle. You see this wealth on display everywhere. A powerful-looking man, likely a chieftain or royal advisor, strides past, his entourage clearing a path for him. He's not dripping in gold, but the quality of the hide cloak he wears and the sheer number of prime cattle his household controls are his unmistakable symbols of power. Honestly, it's a refreshingly straightforward system. Forget complex stock portfolios. Your entire net worth is just wandering around a field, mooing. But there was another, more glamorous source of wealth, the one that drew those coastal traders all the way here: gold. The hills and rivers of the Zimbabwean plateau were rich with it. Small-scale mining operations dotted the landscape for miles around the capital. Local Shona miners would sink narrow shafts, following seams of gold-bearing quartz, or they would pan for alluvial gold in the riverbeds. This wasn't a massive, industrial operation, but a patient, seasonal activity. The gold was gathered, smelted into small, unassuming ingots, or worked into delicate beads and foils, and then traded. And this is where the genius of Great Zimbabwe's leaders becomes clear. They likely didn't mine the gold themselves, but controlled its trade, positioning their capital as the mandatory funnel through which all the wealth of the interior had to pass before it reached the coast. It was a monopoly enforced not just by military might, but by religious and political authority. You pass a small, open-sided workshop where a craftsman is at work. He is not making grand jewelry for local elites. He's working ivory. On the ground beside him is a massive elephant tusk, its smooth, cream-colored surface waiting to be transformed. The craftsman is using a simple iron adze to carefully shape the material, carving it into ornate containers, bracelets, or perhaps even the mbira, a type of local musical instrument often called a thumb piano. Ivory, like gold, was a hugely valuable export, sought after in India and China. It flowed from the interior, through the marketplace of Great Zimbabwe, and out into the vast network of the Indian Ocean trade. In exchange for the gold and ivory, the coastal merchants brought goods that were exotic and valuable here. You see evidence of this trade all around you. A wealthy woman passes, and around her neck is not a string of local seeds, but of vibrant blue and green glass beads from Persia. In another workshop, you see a craftsman studying a fragment of Celadon porcelain from Ming Dynasty China. Its delicate green glaze, a thing of alien beauty here in the heart of Africa. The sheer reach of this trade is breathtaking. This city, hundreds of miles from the sea, was a vital node in a global economic system. Historians still argue whether the elites of Great Zimbabwe kept the finest imported luxuries for themselves, or if goods like glass beads were more widely distributed among the general population as status symbols. Evidence of these imports: Syrian glass, Chinese pottery, Persian faiences, has been unearthed all over the city. from the most elite enclosures to the common middens, suggesting a complex and layered system of distribution and value. What you are witnessing is the quiet, humming engine of an empire. It's a system built on a foundation of cattle, fueled by the glitter of gold and the gleam of ivory, and connected to the far corners of the world by a patient network of traders and travelers. It's an economy that is deeply African in its roots, but thoroughly international in its scope. And as you watch a Swahili merchant and a local Shona headman haggle good-naturedly over the price of an ivory bracelet using a mix of gestures and shared trade words, you realize this city isn't isolated at all. It is a vital, beating heart, pumping the wealth of a continent out into the world. You've spent enough time in the lively, chaotic, yet ordered world of the lower city. The rhythm of common life, the hum of the marketplace, the smoky intimacy of the Daga Hutsit has all served as a kind of overture. Now, you feel an irresistible pull toward the main event, the architectural marvel that has dominated the skyline since you first arrived. You turn away from the marketplace and begin walking towards the great enclosure. The path here is clearer, more deliberate. The ambient noise of the city begins to fall away, replaced by a sense of hushed reverence. It feels like you're approaching a cathedral. The great enclosure sits on the valley floor, separate from the bustling residential areas, a clear statement of its special status. It's not a fortress for the masses or a palace for the king to live in. Its purpose is something else entirely. The scale of the outer wall is difficult to process. As you get closer, you have to crane your neck to see the top. It rises over 36 feet high in some places, a flowing, elliptical curtain of stone more than 800 feet in circumference. Remember, this is all built without a single drop of mortar. The stones, called granite gneiss, were quarried from the surrounding hills. You can see how the builders cleaved the natural granite boulders along their fracture lines to create roughly uniform, brick-like blocks. Then, they patiently, meticulously laid them in level courses. The outer face is smooth and sheer, a testament to their extraordinary skill. It's estimated that this single wall contains nearly 1 million stone blocks. The sheer amount of labor involved is staggering, a community effort that must have spanned generations. It's the kind of project that requires not just engineering know-how, but a profound, shared belief in its importance. The kind of project that makes complaining about assembling IKEA furniture feel just a little bit pathetic. You finally reach the base of the wall, and its presence is immense. The stones are a dark, mottled gray, colonized by patches of golden-green lichen. They are cool to the touch. You run your hand over the surface, feeling the texture of the individual blocks and the tight, precise lines where they meet. There is a strange intimacy to it, to touch a surface that was shaped by human hands so long ago. You begin to trace its circumference, following the perfect, gentle curve. The top of the wall is decorated with a beautiful chevron pattern, a simple but elegant finishing touch that runs for hundreds of feet. It's another reminder that this was not just a utilitarian structure, it was a work of art, a massive piece of public sculpture. This structure represents the absolute peak of the Great Zimbabwe architectural style, a mature and confident expression of their building tradition. While the hill complex you can see above you is older, its walls are rougher, more integrated with the natural boulders. Here, in the great enclosure, the builders have imposed their will on the landscape, creating a freestanding monument of pure, human-designed geometry. The wall is also an incredible piece of engineering. It's over 16 feet thick at its base, tapering to about 3 feet at the top. This wider base gives it the stability it needed to stand for centuries, a subtle design feature that speaks to a deep, practical understanding of physics and materials. Historians still argue whether the monumental task of quarrying and shaping these millions of stones was done by a dedicated class of specialist stonemasons or by the general population as a form of seasonal tribute or religious duty. Was it a paid profession? Or was it a community's offering to its gods and its king? As you walk, the immense silence of the wall feels powerful. It was clearly designed to separate and seclude. What lay inside was not meant for public consumption. Its purpose was to create a space apart, a world within a world, reserved for the most important people or the most sacred ceremonies. Its imposing height and the single, easily guarded entrance would have made it a highly exclusive zone. The power of the enclosure is not just in its size, but in its ability to inspire awe and curiosity. For the average citizen of Great Zimbabwe, who lived their entire life in the valley below, the great enclosure must have been a place of profound mystery. They would have seen its walls every day, a constant reminder of the power and sacredness that lay within, but they would never have been allowed to enter. It's an architecture of psychological control as much as physical enclosure. The biggest fence makes you the most curious about the yard behind it. You complete your circuit and find yourself at the main northern entrance, a narrow break in the otherwise seamless wall. Two smaller rounded walls flank the opening, creating a formal gateway. There are no doors, no gates to be seen, but there would have been guards, stern and watchful, ensuring only the initiated could pass. The stones around the entrance are worn smoother than elsewhere, polished by the passage of countless hands and bodies over many years. You stand at the threshold, the cool, dark passage beckoning you forward. The low hum of the valley seems a world away now. You are about to step out of the realm of the common and into the precinct of power and mystery. You take a breath and step into the shadows of the gateway. Stepping through the narrow entrance of the great enclosure is like passing through a portal into another dimension. The bright sun and the open vistas of the valley are instantly replaced by a world of stone, shadow, and confined spaces. The sheer mass of the outer wall, which was so imposing from the outside, now feels protective, insulating. The ambient sounds of the city are completely gone, replaced by an intense, ringing silence. Your footsteps on the hard-packed earth echo slightly against the stone. You are now inside the royal compound, or at least what most archaeologists believe was the domain of the kingdom's most powerful elites, perhaps the Queen Mother or a council of high priests and priestesses. The king himself, it's widely believed, resided in the more ancient and sacred hill complex above. The space inside is not a vast, empty courtyard. It's a maze of more stone walls, passages, and platforms for daga huts, echoing the circular design of the rest of the city, but on a far grander and more mysterious scale. The first thing you notice is the narrow parallel passage. Just inside the main entrance, you're funneled into a long, curving corridor that runs between the massive outer wall and a secondary, inner wall. The passage is tight, only a few feet wide in places. Walking down it, with 30-foot walls of silent stone rising on either side of you, is an unsettling experience. You can only see a narrow strip of blue sky high above. The acoustics are strange. Your softest breath seems to whisper back at you. This wasn't designed for casual strolling. Its purpose feels ceremonial and controlling, forcing anyone who enters to proceed slowly, in single file, along a prescribed path. It's an architectural way of saying, "You are now on our turf, and you will move how we tell you to move." A bit like the queuing system at airport security, but with infinitely more style and much less passive aggression. After what feels like a very long walk, the passage opens into a series of interconnected enclosures, courtyards of varying sizes. Here and there, you see the familiar raised daga platforms, indicating that people did live here. But these are not the simple family homes you saw in the valley. The platforms are larger, the remaining fragments of daga flooring more finely finished. These were the residences of the city's highest-ranking individuals, after the king. Archaeologists have found evidence of great wealth in these enclosures. Caches of prestige goods, like imported ceramics, intricate gold jewelry, and the tools used by elite metal workers. This was a space of power and privilege, deliberately separated from the common folk. One of the more peculiar and quirky finds within the great enclosure were numerous soapstone folly and other fertility symbols. While their exact use is debated, they strongly suggest the area was tied to important rites of passage, initiation ceremonies for young people, or rituals designed to ensure the fertility of the people and the land. The layout is deliberately confusing. Passages lead to dead ends. Openings reveal yet more enclosures. It's easy to become disoriented, to lose your sense of direction. This complex design was likely intentional, a way of maintaining secrecy and controlling movement within the compound. Only those who belonged here would have known the correct path to the most important ceremonial spaces. As a visitor, you would be entirely dependent on your host to guide you through the stone labyrinth. The whole place is a masterclass in using architecture to reinforce social hierarchy. Every twist and turn reminds you that you are an outsider, that you are treading on hallowed ground. Historians still argue intensely about the primary function of the great enclosure. Was it the residence of the powerful Queen Mother, who in many Shona societies held a position of immense spiritual and political authority? Or was it an initiation school, where the children of the elite were educated in the traditions and secrets of the kingdom? A third theory proposes it was a site for national religious ceremonies, presided over by the kingdom's most senior priests. Perhaps it was all of these things at once, a multi-purpose center of power, ritual, and elite residence. What's certain is that it was not the home of the king himself. His symbolic and spiritual role demanded that he live apart, in the more ancient and mystically charged complex on the hill. This separation of the king's residence from another major power center is a classic political arrangement, a system of checks and balances written in stone. It suggests a complex and sophisticated political structure, not a simple, absolute monarchy. As you wander deeper into the enclosure, you notice the exceptional quality of the stonework on some of the interior walls. There are more decorative patterns, checkerboards, slanted blocks, and courses of stone that are angled to catch the light in different ways. The builders reserved their finest work for the most important spaces within the compound. This wasn't just construction, it was communication. The very walls were telling a story of power, prestige, and sacred importance. Lost in the maze, you round another massive curve of stone, and suddenly, the space opens up. Before you stands the single most enigmatic and iconic structure in all of Great Zimbabwe. You have arrived at the base of the Conical Tower. You are standing in the largest of the open courtyards within the great enclosure, and before you is the Conical Tower. It is, without a doubt, one of the strangest and most captivating structures you will ever see. It rises from the ground with a seamless, organic grace, a solid tower of mortarless stone about 18 feet in diameter at its base, and reaching a height of over 30 feet. Unlike everything else you have seen, which is about creating space, this is the opposite. It is a solid, impenetrable mass of stone. There is no door, no window, no internal staircase, no room at the top. It is utterly and completely solid, a massive, exquisitely built stone sculpture. Its purpose is a complete mystery, a 900-year-old question mark rendered in 250,000 blocks of granite. You walk slowly around its base, the sheer strangeness of it holding you spellbound. The stonework is immaculate, perhaps the finest in the entire city. The courses are perfectly level, the individual stones shaped and fitted with a watchmaker's precision. The top is finished with the same decorative chevron pattern as the main outer wall, linking it stylistically to the enclosure as a whole. It stands in close proximity to a smaller, secondary tower, which is of a similar design but has been more heavily damaged over the centuries. They form a silent, enigmatic pair. Standing before them feels like you've stumbled upon a secret that you lack the language to understand. It's an object that radiates importance but refuses to explain why. So, what is it for? This is the central, enduring puzzle of Great Zimbabwe, and scholars have been throwing theories at it for over a century with no definitive answer. The most prevalent theory, and the one that feels the most resonant, is that the tower is a symbolic granary. As we've discussed, grain millet and sorghum was a cornerstone of life, and the king's authority was deeply tied to his ability to provide for his people. The king would collect grain as tribute and, in times of drought or famine, would redistribute it from his royal granaries, solidifying his role as the great provider. Therefore, a massive, permanent, and perfectly formed stone granary, filled not with grain but with solid stone, would be an incredibly powerful symbol. It's a symbolic statement of abundance and security, a permanent promise of the king's provision, a stone harvest that would never rot or be empty. A bit like building a giant, solid gold piggy bank to symbolize wealth, but infinitely more poetic. Another popular theory connects the tower's phallic shape to fertility rituals. Given the discovery of soapstone phalli and other feminine symbols within the great enclosure, this idea makes a lot of sense. The tower, in this interpretation, could be a monumental phallic symbol, representing the masculine element in a cosmic partnership with the feminine earth or the enclosing wall itself. It would have been the focal point for ceremonies aimed at ensuring the fertility of the land, the cattle, and the people of the kingdom. It would be a sacred object, embodying the very essence of life and continuity. This interpretation places the great enclosure firmly in the realm of sacred ritual, a place where the fundamental forces of the universe were appealed to and celebrated. Then there are the more fringe, but still interesting, ideas. A more prosaic explanation suggests it's simply a declaration of skill and power. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe commissioned the tower as an ultimate expression of their wealth and the mastery of their stonemasons. Look at what we can do, it seems to say. We have so much labor and resources, we can afford to build massive, perfectly crafted structures that have no practical purpose whatsoever. In this view, it's the medieval Shona equivalent of a billionaire building a rocket ship just because he can. A pure, unadulterated power move. Another quirky and less supported tidbit of speculation connects the tower to astronomical alignments, suggesting it may have served as part of a giant calendar, marking the solstices or other significant celestial events, though hard evidence for this is scarce. Historians still argue whether the Conical Tower was built at the same time as the main wall or added later, as its style seems even more refined. Dating the different phases of a mortarless stone structure is incredibly difficult, relying on subtle shifts in technique and any associated artifacts found at the base of the walls. Whatever its original purposes, symbolic, granary, fertility icon, or a magnificent folly of the extravagantly wealthy, its power today comes from its silence. It keeps its secrets well. It invites speculation, but offers no answers. It forces you to simply stand and look, to feel its presence, and to appreciate it for what it is. A masterpiece of abstract sculpture and a testament to a belief system we can no longer fully access. As you stand there, the late afternoon sun catches the top of the tower, and the chevron pattern seems to ripple with light. You can imagine a priest or priestess standing on this very spot, chanting a prayer to the silent, watchful tower, its solid presence, a comfort, and an anchor in their world. You have seen the might of the walls and the mystery of the tower. Now, another of the city's secrets awaits discovery. After lingering by the silent enigma of the Conical Tower, you're guided by an attendanta priestess, perhaps, her wrists adorned with bangles of copper and ivory through another series of winding passages. She leads you to a smaller, more secluded enclosure tucked away near the eastern side of the compound. Here, shaded by a thatched awning, are several daga huts, but one of them is clearly special. The daga work is finer, decorated with molded patterns, and the threshold is marked with polished river stones. This, she indicates with a gesture, was a place of great spiritual power. It is here, within the sacred confines of the great enclosure, and later in the even more sacred hill complex, that the most famous artifacts of this lost civilization were found. The Zimbabwe birds. You step into the cool interior of the hut. There, resting on a raised daga platform, is one of these incredible sculptures. It's carved from a single piece of soapstone, a soft, greenish-gray rock that is easy to shape but hardens with exposure to air. The sculpture stands about 16 inches tall, a composite creature of bird and human features perched atop a pillar or monolith. The bird part is stylized but powerful, most likely representing a battler eagle or a similar raptor, a creature that holds deep symbolic meaning in Shona cosmology, as a messenger between the worlds of the living and the spirit ancestors. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. The artist has captured the bird's alert posture, its keen gaze, its powerful beak. But this is no mere wildlife carving. The bird has humanoid features, like five-toed feet instead of talons, subtly blending the animal and human realms. The bird is inseparable from the monolith it sits on. This pillar, about 3 feet tall, is covered in intricate, geometric pattern chevrons, lines, and circles that echo the decorations on the great walls themselves. The bird and pillar are one, a single, powerful statement. You're looking at an emblem of royal and spiritual authority, a tangible link between the king, his ancestors, and the divine. 8 of these birds have been found in total, 7 in a remarkable state of preservation, and 1 fragmentary. Most were discovered here, within the elite enclosures of Great Zimbabwe, particularly high on the hill complex, which we'll visit later. Their discovery in the late 19th century was a pivotal moment, but also a tragic one, as they were plundered by early treasure hunters and colonists who couldn't or wouldn't believe that such sophisticated art could be of African origin. The story goes that a prospector and artifact hunter named Willie Posselt was the first European to see one of the birds in situ in 1889. Guided to the hill complex, he found 4 of them standing in an enclosure. He tried to buy all 4 from the local Karanga headman, but was refused. In a classic act of colonial entitlement, he then offered to trade his rifle and a blanket for just 1. The headman agreed, and Posselt proceeded to hack the bird from its base, carrying it away with another smaller artifact. It was a deal made under an imbalance of power, the first act in the scattering of these sacred national treasures. He later sold the bird for a pittance to Cecil Rhodes, the arch-imperialist, who adopted it as a symbol for his British South Africa Company. It was a grotesque appropriation of a deeply sacred object for a colonial project. One of my favorite, slightly nerdy historical tidbits is that this first plundered bird was depicted on the currency of colonial Rhodesia for decades, a constant, ironic reminder of the culture they were actively trying to suppress and misrepresent. Looking at the bird in front of you, you can feel its spiritual weight. It is not just a statue. It is an ancestor, an oracle, a messenger. The battler eagle, which many scholars believe is the model, flies high and has a distinctive, rocking flight pattern. To the Shona, it was seen as moving between the heavens and the earth, a natural go-between for the living king and the spirits of his royal ancestors. The king would consult the spirits on all important matters: war, famine, succession, and these birds would have been the focal point of such rituals, physical conduits for divine communication. They weren't just pretty decorations for the king's house. They were vital pieces of spiritual technology. Historians still argue about the precise meaning of the different bird sculptures. Do the subtle variations in their design represent different royal lineages, or perhaps different types of messages they were meant to convey from the spirit world? The attendant gestures towards the monolith the bird is perched upon. She points to a small, carved crocodile climbing up the front of the pillar, just below the bird's perch. The crocodile is another powerful royal symbol, an animal that moves between the water and the land, another liminal creature, just as the king moved between the physical and spiritual realms. This blending of symbol seagull, crocodile, humanon, a single object, speaks to a complex and deeply layered belief system. The bird in front of you feels ancient and alive. It seems to watch you with its stone eyes, a silent guardian of a forgotten faith. Over the centuries, these sacred objects were taken from their home, scattered across the globe, from Rhodes's estate to museums in Cape Town and Berlin. The struggle to repatriate them has been a long and emotional journey for the modern nation of Zimbabwe, a fight to reclaim not just an artifact, but a piece of its soul. In 2003, after decades of negotiation, the last bird fragment held in Germany was finally returned. And today, the image of the Zimbabwe bird is the central feature on the nation's flag, a powerful symbol of independence, identity, and the enduring legacy of this magnificent stone kingdom. Leaving the profound stillness of the great enclosure and its secrets behind, your journey now takes a literal upward turn. It is time to ascend to the place where it all began, the hill complex. This massive granite hill, or kopje, looms over the entire valley, a natural fortress that served as the original nucleus of the city long before the great enclosure was ever conceived. It is the Acropolis, the sacred high ground, the undisputed seat of the king himself. The path you take is not a grand, wide staircase, but a narrow, winding, and often steep track that has been skillfully integrated into the natural contours of the hill. In many places, the path is the rock itself, worn smooth by centuries of royal and priestly feet. In others, the ancient builders have laid stone steps or built up retaining walls to make the ascent manageable. The climb is slow and deliberate. It is meant to be. This is not a casual commute, it's a pilgrimage. Every step upward is a step further away from the mundane world of the valley, and a step closer to the sacred realm of the king and his ancestors. The air grows thinner and cooler as you climb. The sounds of the lower city, the cattle, the voices, the blacksmith's hammer fade into a low, indistinct murmur, and then into silence. You are surrounded now by the rustle of wind in the dry grass that clings to the hillside and the immense quiet of the granite boulders that surround you. These boulders are a key feature of the hill complex. The builders didn't clear them away. They incorporated them into their architecture with breathtaking ingenuity. The stone walls of the fortress don't just sit on the hill, they grow out of it. A massive, naturally formed boulder will serve as part of a wall's foundation, or a narrow passage between two giant rocks will be turned into a fortified gateway. It's an organic architecture that blurs the line between the man-made and the natural. The path is a masterpiece of defensive design. It twists and turns, forcing any would-be attacker to expose their flank at every corner. There are narrow gateways, easily blocked, and high ramparts from which defenders could rain down projectiles. One famous section of the path is so narrow it's called the Squeeze Rock Passage, a tight corridor between two massive boulders that would force even a friendly visitor to proceed in a vulnerable, single-file line. It's a clear reminder that this was not just a sacred space but also the ultimate stronghold, the final line of defense for the kingdom's leadership. A less talked about, but fun, detail is how the Shona people viewed these granite hills. They believed the rocks were alive with spirits, and that the constant groaning and cracking sounds the boulders make as they expand and contract in the heat were the voices of those spirits. So, as you climb, the mountain itself is speaking to you. Cheerful thought. As you near the summit, the walls become higher and more imposing. You pass through a series of enclosed courtyards, each one higher than the last, like terraced layers of a cake. These would have been guarded checkpoints, filtering out anyone who did not have the authority to proceed further. Only the highest-ranking officials, priests, and royal family members would have been permitted to complete the ascent. Finally, you pass through the last gateway and emerge onto the summit. The view is absolutely stunning. You can see the entire kingdom laid out below you like a map. The great enclosure sits in the valley, its perfect elliptical shape clear from this vantage point. The sprawling maze of the lower city spreads out from it, a web of countless family compounds. Beyond that, the golden savanna stretches to the horizon, dotted with other smaller hills. From here, the king could look out over his entire domain, a master of all he surveyed. It's a view that doesn't just represent power, it instills it. The summit itself is a complex of enclosures, passages, and daga hut platforms, all nestled amongst the giant boulders. It feels older, more primal than the refined geometry of the great enclosure. The walls are thick and formidable, but the construction is slightly less regular, dating from an earlier period of the city's history. This was the original stone city, the heart from which everything else grew. It is from this very hill that the city and the nation would one day take their name, Zimbabwe, the Houses of Stone. The most prominent feature on the summit is the western enclosure, a semicircular fortification built on the highest point of the hill. It is within this enclosure and the areas surrounding it that archaeologists believe the king held court, performed sacred rituals, and lived his secluded life. Historians still argue about the exact relationship in power and time between the hill complex and the great enclosure. The consensus is that the hill was the original seat of power, home to the king. Then, at the height of the kingdom's influence, the new, magnificent great enclosure was built in the valley. Did this signal a shift in power, perhaps to a powerful queen mother or priestly class who resided there? Or was it simply an expansion, with the king remaining in his ancestral, spiritually charged hilltop home, while another part of the royal court moved to the new, more luxurious quarters below? Whatever the political dynamics, climbing this ancient path has brought you to the literal and figurative peak of the kingdom. The air is clear up here, the world is quiet, and the sense of immense history is palpable in every stone. You are now standing in the king's sacred world. You stand within the western enclosure, on the summit of the hill complex, the wind whispering past the ancient stones. This is the inner sanctum, the very heart of political and spiritual power in the kingdom of Zimbabwe. The king did not live like a modern monarch in a sprawling, opulent palace. His world was one of secluded ritual, constrained by tradition and deep spiritual responsibility. His very being was considered sacred, a living link between the land, his people, and the realm of the ancestors. As such, his daily life was largely hidden from public view, lived out here on this isolated, windswept peak. He was the great mediator, and to maintain his spiritual potency, he had to remain apart from the mundane world below. You can imagine the scene. The king, dressed in fine hides and adorned with gold and ivory, emerges from his private daga hut, built on the most prominent platform within the enclosure. His court is not a massive throng of nobles, but a small, select group. His most trusted ritual specialists, diviners, and senior advisors. They gather in a specific open-air courtyard, one with a commanding view of the valley below. From here, political pronouncements would have been made, not shouted down to the masses, but conveyed to intermediaries who would carry the king's word down the hill and into the city. Justice was also dispensed from this height. A dispute over cattle ownership, a case of theft, or a more serious crime would be brought before the king's court, and his judgment, guided by custom and the wisdom of his advisors, would be final. But the king's primary role was spiritual. The most important area of the hill complex is the eastern enclosure, where 7 of the 8 famous Zimbabwe birds were found standing in a line overlooking the valley. This was almost certainly a ritual site of the highest importance, where the king would communicate with the royal ancestors, Hondoro. You can picture the ceremony. The king, perhaps guided by a head priest, approaches the row of stone birds. Incense made from specific herbs smolders, its fragrant smoke carrying prayers and questions upward. The priest might enter a trance-like state, channeling the voice of an ancestor, while the stone birds served as the physical conduit for this sacred communication. Will the rains be good this year? Should we go to war with the northern clans? Who is the rightful heir to the chieftainship of our vassal? These were the questions posed to the silent watching eagles. The king's political decisions were, in essence, divine decrees, legitimized through this direct line to the spirit world. It's a fairly brilliant way to make sure no one argues with your policies. Don't take it up with me. Take it up with my great-great-great-grandfather's spirit eagle. The daily life of the king was governed by ritual. There would have been specific protocols for how he was addressed, who could look him in the eye, and even what he ate. His food was likely prepared separately, with great care, to avoid any possibility of either physical poison or spiritual contamination. A fascinating quirk of this royal world, attested to and later shown in traditions which likely have their roots here, was the king's fire. A sacred fire was kept perpetually burning in the king's enclosure. It was a symbol of the health and vitality of the entire nation. If the king's fire went out, it was a terrible omen, signifying the end of his reign or a great calamity. Runners would take embers from this sacred fire to light the hearths of subordinate chiefs across the kingdom, a tangible link that bound the realm together, all emanating from the single sacred flame on this hilltop. Historians still argue about the specifics of the king's power. Was he an absolute, divine monarch with unquestioned authority? Or was his power checked by a council of elders or the influence of the Queen Mother down in the great enclosure? The physical separation of the king on the hill from another major power center in the valley strongly suggests the latter a sophisticated system of distributed authority. He may have been the ultimate spiritual head, but practical political power might have been more complex and collaborative. The king was also the ultimate rainmaker. In this savanna environment, rain was life. The king's ability to intercede with the ancestors to ensure timely and plentiful rains was perhaps his most crucial function. A prolonged drought wouldn't just mean a bad harvest, it would be a political crisis, a sign that the king had lost the favor of the spirits and, by extension, his legitimacy to rule. Standing here, looking down at the world he once ruled, you realize the immense pressure and isolation of his position. He was a prisoner of his own divinity, living a life of constant ritual obligation, forever balancing the needs of his people with the demands of his ancestors. He had the best view in the entire kingdom, but he was also the most constrained inhabitant. His was not a life of idle luxury, but one of crushing responsibility. You trace a pattern in the stone of the rampart with your finger, imagining the generations of kings who stood on this very spot, their shoulders bearing the spiritual and political weight of a whole nation. The sun begins to dip lower in the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows from the great boulders. The hill complex grows quieter still, sinking back into the sacred silence that has been its defining characteristic for 1,000 years. After spending time in the rarefied air of the king's sacred world, it's time to come back down to earth and think about something a bit more universal: food. You descend from the quiet peak of the hill complex, the whispers of ancestral spirits fading behind you, and rejoin the bustling energy of the lower city. The smoky scent of countless cooking fires, which was just a background note before, now takes center stage. It's late afternoon, and all over the city, preparations for the evening meal are underway. The cuisine of Great Zimbabwe wasn't about elaborate spices or complex sauces. It was hearty, nutritious, and deeply connected to the land and the agricultural cycle. It was food designed to fuel a civilization. The absolute foundation of the diet, the daily bread for rich and poor alike, was a thick porridge called sadza. If you've traveled in southern Africa, you might know it by other names like ugalai or pap. It's made from ground meal, most commonly from millet and sorghum in this era, which were the two primary cereal crops grown on the terraced hillsides surrounding the city. Preparing it was a daily ritual for the women of every household. They would take the dried grain, grind it into a fine flour, or hupfu, between two stones, a physically demanding process. Then, they would mix the flour with water in a clay pot over the fire, stirring it constantly with a wooden paddle as it thickened into a dense, smooth paste. You can see this happening now in the family compounds you pass. Women are gathered around their hearths, their rhythmic stirring a familiar, comforting part of the day's end. Sadza itself is fairly plain, so its true joy comes from the relish, or nyama, usavi, served alongside it. This relish is where the variety and flavor came in. For most people, on most days, this would be a stew made from leafy green vegetables like a type of local wild spinach, or the leaves of the cowpea plant, perhaps flavored with wild onions or other foraged herbs. Sometimes it might include beans, groundnuts, a type of local peanut, or other legumes. To eat, you would break off a small piece of the hot sadza with your fingers, roll it into a ball in your palm, and then use it to scoop up the savory relish. It was a communal and wonderfully tactile way of eating. And, I have to say, it's a brilliant system for minimizing washing up. Your plate is also your cutlery. It's genius. Of course, the star of the Zimbabwean menu, the food of celebration and status, was meat. And the most prized meat of all came from their beloved cattle. Remember how wealth was measured in cows? That wasn't just an abstract economic idea. Owning cattle meant having access to the ultimate luxury food. Beef, however, was not an everyday meal for the average person. A cow was far too valuable an asset to be slaughtered casually. The killing of a cow was reserved for major events: a wedding, a funeral, a visit from an important chieftain, or a great religious festival. On these occasions, the community would come together for a feast. The meat would be roasted over an open fire or boiled in large pots to make a rich stew, and the whole community would share in the bounty. The archaeological record is full of cattle bones, a testament to just how central these feasts were to the city's social and political life. The distribution of meat during a feast would have followed strict social protocols, with the choicest cuts going to the elders and the most important men. Besides beef, the people of Great Zimbabwe ate goat, another important domestic animal, as well as mutton from their fat-tailed sheep. They were also skilled hunters, bringing in game from the surrounding savanna. Antelope, warthog, and other wild animals would have supplemented their diet. And for a little bit of quirky protein, a local delicacy, then as now, was the mopane worma, large, edible caterpillar of the emperor moth. High in protein, they could be plucked from mopane trees, squeezed to expel their gut contents, sorry for the visual, and then dried in the sun or smoked to be preserved for later. When rehydrated and fried or stewed, they have a nutty, slightly earthy flavor. Don't knock it till you've tried it. Historians still argue about the extent of agriculture within the city itself. While the major fields were outside the city walls, it's likely that small garden plots were cultivated within the family enclosures, growing pumpkins, gourds, cowpeas, and other vegetables. This would have provided a ready supply of fresh produce for the daily relish. And to drink? The most common beverage was water, of course, carried daily from the nearby rivers or springs. But the drink of choice for social occasions was a thick, frothy, and nutritious beer, also brewed from millet or sorghum. It was low in alcohol compared to modern beers and was a staple of social life, offered to guests as a sign of hospitality and consumed in large quantities during celebrations and ceremonies. As you walk through the valley, the smells of stewing greens, roasting meat from some wealthy compound's feast, and the sweet, yeasty aroma of brewing beer all combine into a rich and comforting perfume. It's the smell of a community preparing to rest and refuel after a long day's work under the African sun. You've seen the king on his hill and the farmer in his hut. You've tasted the sadza of the commoner and imagined the roasted beef of the elites. Now, let's try to put all the pieces together and understand the social ladder that held this complex society upright. The structure of life in Great Zimbabwe was rigidly hierarchical, a pyramid with the divine king at its apex and the farmers and laborers forming its broad, sturdy base. Your place in this pyramid was almost certainly determined by birth, and it dictated every aspect of your life, from where you lived and what you ate to whom you could marry. At the very top, as we've seen, was the King Mambo. He was a sacred figure, the political, judicial, and spiritual leader of the nation. His authority stemmed from his direct lineage to the founding ancestors of the kingdom. He lived in seclusion on the hill complex, his divinity a source of both immense power and immense constraint. Just below the king was a class of hereditary nobles and aristocrats. This group included the royal family, the Queen Mother, who may have held her own court in the great enclosure, provincial chiefs who ruled over outlying territories, and the king's senior advisors and ritual specialists. These were the people who lived in the most luxurious daga huts within the great enclosure or in the elite compounds on the hill. They controlled vast herds of cattle, had privileged access to trade goods like glass beads and fine cloth, and were likely the only ones entitled to wear certain types of regalia made from gold, ivory, or the pelts of specific animals like leopards. Their lives were dedicated to politics, religion, and the management of the kingdom's wealth. Below the aristocracy was a burgeoning middle class of skilled artisans, merchants, and lower-level officials. This group included the master stonemasons who orchestrated the construction of the Great Walls, the blacksmiths who forged the iron tools and weapons essential to the kingdom's survival, and the goldsmiths who worked the precious metal into fine jewelry. The local merchants who managed the flow of goods within the city and acted as intermediaries for the great coastal traders also belonged to this stratum. These individuals enjoyed a higher status than common farmers because of their specialized skills. They would have lived in the larger, more well-appointed compounds in the lower city, and their diet would have been more varied. They were the engine of the city's economy, the crucial link between the ruling class and the laborers. A fun, fringe theory suggests that the complex and confusing layout of the great enclosure wasn't just for ritual or defense, but also a way to physically separate competing noble families from each other to minimize political squabbles and plots, like a very, very elaborate stone cubicle farm for feuding aristocrats. The vast majority of Great Zimbabwe's 0 residents, however, belonged to the commoner class. These were the farmers who tilled the surrounding fields of sorghum and millet, and the herders who tended the kingdom's immense cattle wealth. They lived in the smaller family compounds in the sprawling valley ruins, their lives governed by the seasons and the demands of their aristocratic overlords. They owed tribute to the king in the form of grain, cattle, and labor, perhaps contributing a certain number of weeks per year to quarrying stone for the monumental building projects, or serving as soldiers in the king's army. While their lives were simpler, it would be a mistake to think of them as impoverished serfs. They were part of a reciprocal system. In exchange for their tribute, the king provided military protection, dispensed justice, and, most importantly, interceded with the ancestors to ensure the cosmic order and the coming of the rains. It was a social contract, and as long as all parties fulfilled their obligations, the kingdom thrived. At the very bottom of the social ladder were likely slaves or captives, though their role in the economy is one of the more debated topics among historians. Great Zimbabwe was certainly powerful enough to take captives in war from neighboring, less centralized peoples. These individuals would have had the fewest rights and would have been assigned the most arduous manual labor. Some may have been sold to the Swahili traders as part of the Indian Ocean slave trade, though many scholars believe that the trade in gold and ivory was far more central to the kingdom's economy than the trade in human lives. Evidence on this is scarce, making it a difficult but important area of ongoing research. This rigid social structure was visible in the very layout of the city. Your social status directly corresponded to your physical location. The closer you lived to the centers of power, the hill complex, and the great enclosure, the higher your rank. The further you lived out in the sprawling valley, the lower your status. The city was a map of its own social hierarchy, written in stone and distance. Social mobility would have been extremely limited. You were born a farmer, and you would die a farmer. You were born into a noble lineage, and you would rule. This rigid structure wasn't seen as unjust. It was the natural, divinely ordained order of the universe. Everyone had a role to play, from the sacred king on his lonely peak to the woman grinding sorghum in a dusty courtyard. It was this intricate web of rights and responsibilities, this shared understanding of one's place in the world, that allowed such a massive and complex society to function for centuries. By the mid-15th century, At the absolute zenith of its power and influence, something strange began to happen at Great Zimbabwe. The hum of the city began to fade. The once bustling thoroughfares grew quieter. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer became less frequent. Slowly, deliberately, and for reasons that are still debated, the people of Great Zimbabwe began to leave. The decline of this magnificent city was not a sudden, violent collapse. There are no layers of ash and rubble to indicate a catastrophic sack of the city. There are no mass graves to suggest a devastating plague. Instead, it was a quiet, gradual abandonment, a slow unwinding of the complex society that had thrived here for over 300 years. You are walking through the city now, in its final days, perhaps around the year 1450. The scale is still impressive, but the energy has changed. You see entire sections of the lower city that are empty, the daga huts beginning to crumble, their thatched roofs caving in. Grass is starting to reclaim the courtyards where children once played. In the marketplace, there are fewer traders from the coast, the flow of exotic goods having slowed to a trickle. The great stone walls stand as proud as ever, but they are now enclosing a growing silence. It's a melancholy sight, like a grand theater after the audience has gone home. What could have caused such a prosperous capital to be abandoned? Scholars have proposed several overlapping theories, and the truth likely lies in a combination of factors. One of the most compelling arguments is environmental degradation. Supporting a population of up to 18,000 people for several centuries would have put an immense strain on the local ecosystem. The surrounding hills would have been stripped of trees for building materials and firewood. The land would have been intensively farmed and grazed year after year, leading to soil exhaustion. The middens, those archaeological treasure troves of trash, show a decline in the number of cattle bones in the city's later years, suggesting the surrounding pasture land could no longer support the massive herds that were the bedrock of the kingdom's wealth. Essentially, the very success of Great Zimbabwe may have contained the seeds of its own decline. The city simply outgrew its environment's capacity to support it. Like a host who throws a party that's a little too good, they eventually ran out of snacks. Another powerful theory points to a shift in trade routes. For centuries, Great Zimbabwe had controlled the lucrative trade in gold and ivory from the plateau to the Swahili coast via the Save River. However, in the 15th century, trade activity began to shift northward, focusing on the Zambezi River Valley. New competing states and powers began to rise in the north, such as the Mutapa state, which offered a more direct route for the gold trade. As the economic lifeblood of the city was slowly diverted elsewhere, the king's wealth and ability to command tribute would have diminished. The coastal traders would have started bypassing Great Zimbabwe, taking their precious glass beads and Chinese porcelain to the new centers of power. Without this constant flow of prestige goods to redistribute, the king's authority over his subordinate chiefs would have begun to fray. Political instability could have also played a major role. The abandonment of Great Zimbabwe corresponds with the rise of two other major successor states, the aforementioned Mutapa state to the north and the Torwa state to the west, centered on the stone city of Kami. A quirky and fascinating archaeological find that supports this is that the style of stonework at Kami is clearly a direct evolution of the techniques used at Great Zimbabwe. It's not a new invention, it's the next chapter. It's widely believed that the ruling elite of Great Zimbabwe itself split. One powerful faction, led by a prince named Nyatsimba Mutota, moved north to establish the new Mutapa kingdom in the more fertile and economically strategic Zambezi Valley. Another group moved west to establish the Torwa kingdom. Historians still argue whether this was a violent civil war, a peaceful secession, or a planned series of relocations to greener pastures. But the outcome was the same. The central authority of Great Zimbabwe fractured, and its most powerful and ambitious leaders simply left, taking their followers with them. It's likely all these factors were interconnected. Perhaps a series of droughts, evidence of which exists in regional climate data, exacerbated the environmental pressures, which in turn weakened the king's spiritual authority as a rainmaker. This political weakness might have been the catalyst for an ambitious prince to lead his followers away to a more promising region, effectively shifting the trade routes and sealing the old capital's fate. So, the decline was not a death, but a dispersal. The culture of Great Zimbabwe didn't vanish. It transformed and relocated, seeding new, powerful kingdoms. The people you see leaving the city are not fleeing in terror. They are moving with purpose, family by family, clan by clan, following their leaders to new homes. They are taking their skills as stonemasons, their social structures, and their spiritual beliefs with them. They leave behind the silent stone walls, not as a monument to failure, but as a testament to the greatness that was. The city had served its purpose, and now its time was over. The last Shona families have departed. The king's sacred fire on the hill has gone out. An immense silence settles over the stone city, broken only by the wind whistling through the narrow passages and the chirping of the birds that now nest in the great walls. For the next 400 years, Great Zimbabwe sleeps. It never completely disappears from the knowledge of the local Shona people, who continue to regard it as a sacred and venerable place, the home of their ancestors. But to the outside world, it fades into legend, a half-remembered rumor of a great stone city deep in the African interior. That is, until the late 19th century, when the site is rediscovered by European hunters, prospectors, and colonists. And this is where the story takes a tragic and infuriating turn. You are now a ghost, watching as the first European visitors, men like the German-American prospector Karl Mauch in 1871, stumble upon the ruins. They are utterly dumbfounded. The scale, the sophistication of the stonework, the sheer monumental presence of the city, it simply does not compute with their deeply ingrained racist ideologies. In the colonial mindset of the era, Africans were deemed incapable of organizing labor, engineering, or creating anything of this magnitude. So, they invented a fantasy. These explorers, and the amateur archaeologists who followed them, looked at the majestic ruins and declared that they could not possibly be of African origin. This led to a century of harmful, ludicrous, and deeply damaging speculation. The most famous of these theories was that Great Zimbabwe was built by ancient white people. The leading candidate, for some reason, was the Queen of Sheba. The idea was that the ruins were the site of the biblical city of Ophir, the legendary location of King Solomon's mines. This romantic, biblically tinged fantasy was eagerly seized upon by men like Cecil Rhodes, the British imperialist, who was carving out a private colony in the region. The Sheba myth was politically useful. If this land was once the domain of a great white queen, it provided a twisted historical justification for white settlement and colonial rule. It was a way of erasing the accomplishments of the indigenous people and claiming their history as your own. One of the more ridiculous tidbits from this era of speculation was the frantic search for any kind of writing or inscription that would prove this external influence. When none was found, proponents of the theory claimed the builders must have been illiterate. The mental gymnastics are truly breathtaking. This wasn't just an academic debate. It had devastating consequences for the site itself. Convinced that the true history of Zimbabwe lay buried beneath the decadent layers of later African occupation, early excavators like Richard Hall acted more like treasure hunters than archaeologists. Between 1902 and 1904, under the guise of scientific investigation, Hall cleared out vast sections of the site, particularly in the hill complex. He shoveled away layers of archaeological deposits up to 12 feet deep, indiscriminately discarding anything he considered to be of native, origin local pottery, hut remains, tool sin, a frantic search for Phoenician, Egyptian, or Sabaean artifacts that simply weren't there. It was an act of archaeological vandalism on a catastrophic scale. He destroyed centuries of history, wiping out the very evidence that would have answered so many questions about the city's life and decline. It's like trying to understand the history of Rome by bulldozing everything but the Colosseum. Thankfully, not all early researchers were so blinded by prejudice. As early as 1905, the first professional archaeologist to survey the site, David Randall McIver, looked at the evidence with clear eyes. He examined the artifacts that Hall had discarded, studied the unexcavated sections, and declared unequivocally that the objects found, the pottery, the ironwork, the very style of the buildings, were undeniably local and medieval in date. They were, he concluded, African. His findings were confirmed in 1929 by another pioneering female archaeologist, Gertrude Caton Thompson, whose meticulous excavations provided definitive proof of the site's indigenous origins. But their scientific conclusions were largely ignored for decades. The romantic myth of a lost white civilization was too powerful, too politically convenient for the white minority government of what was then called Rhodesia. Historians still argue about the full extent of the damage done by these early antiquarians. While Hall's destruction was immense, later archaeologists have been able to carefully salvage a great deal of information from undisturbed sections of the site. Throughout the long decades of colonial rule, the official narrative remained one of foreign origin. The fight to reclaim the history of Great Zimbabwe became a central part of the African nationalist movement in the 1960s and 70s. For the leaders of the independence struggle, proving that their ancestors had built this magnificent city was a powerful act of resistance. It was a direct refutation of the colonial lie that they were a people without history. Standing here as a silent witness, you can feel the weight of this intellectual battle, this struggle over memory and identity. It is a stark reminder that history is not just about the past. It is a battleground, a story that people fight and die to control. The stones themselves have been silent witnesses to it all. The dust of colonial misinterpretation has settled. The battle for the site's history has been fought and won. Now, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, you see Great Zimbabwe in a new light, not as a puzzle to be solved by outsiders, but as a living symbol for a new nation. When the white minority government of Rhodesia fell, the leaders of the independence movement chose a new name for their country, a name that would sever all ties with the colonial past and connect them directly to their own proud pre-colonial history. They chose Zimbabwe. It was a declaration that the spirit of the Great Stone Kingdom, with its power, its artistry, and its deep African roots, was alive and well. The site is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, protected and managed by the people who rightfully claim it as their heritage. The stone walls, once the subject of fantastical foreign theories, are now studied and celebrated for what they are: the pinnacle of a uniquely African architectural tradition. You watch as a group of Zimbabwean schoolchildren are led on a tour by a local guide. He is speaking to them in Shona, and he points to the chevron pattern on the great enclosure wall. He's not telling them tales of King Solomon or a Phoenician queen. He is telling them about the engineering genius of their own ancestors, the social structure of the Shona kingdom, the spiritual meaning of the Conical Tower. For these children, the ruins are not a mystery. They are a birthright. It's a powerful and deeply moving transformation. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe is not confined to its stone walls. It lives on in the language, customs, and beliefs of the modern Shona people, who make up the majority of the country's population. The deep reverence for ancestral spirits, the importance of cattle as a measure of social standing, the architectural echo of circular forms in rural homesteads. These are all cultural threads that stretch back through time to the great city. The iconic Zimbabwe bird, once plundered and used as a symbol of colonial oppression, now adorns the national flag, banknotes, and official documents of a sovereign nation. It has been fully reclaimed, transformed from a stolen artifact into a potent emblem of independence, unity, and resilience. It's the ultimate act of historical reversal. Of course, the city still holds its secrets. Historians still argue, as we've heard, about the precise function of the Great Enclosure, the exact nature of the king's power, and the specific combination of factors that led to the city's quiet decline. The damage done by early, reckless excavations means some questions will probably never be answered with certainty. The stones keep some of their silence, but this ambiguity is also part of its enduring power. It leaves room for wonder, for imagination, for continued study and debate. Great Zimbabwe is not a closed book. It is a story that is still being written and reinterpreted by each new generation. One final, quirky aspect of its legacy is its impact on the wider world's imagination. As one of the largest and most visually stunning ancient sites in sub-Saharan Africa, it has fired the imaginations of writers and artists for over a century, inspiring novels, poems, and even fantasy settings. It stands as a powerful counter-narrative to the outdated image of a dark continent without history or civilization. It is a stone-cold, irrefutable fact of African achievement, a silent but eloquent rebuke to centuries of prejudice. As the sun sets on your journey, it bathes the stone walls in a soft, golden light. The granite glows with warmth, seeming to absorb the last heat of the day. You see the hill complex in silhouette, a timeless monument to power and faith. You see the elegant curve of the Great Enclosure, a testament to artistic vision and communal effort. You have walked the paths of kings and commoners, witnessed the rise and fall of a great trading empire, and seen the city through the eyes of its builders, its inheritors, and its interpreters. You've understood its strength, not just in its massive walls, but in its intricate social fabric, its deep spirituality, and its profound connection to the African soil. Great Zimbabwe is more than just an archaeological site. It is a statement that great civilizations can rise and fall, that history can be stolen and reclaimed, and that the spirit of a people can be so powerfully embedded in stone that it can endure for 1,000 years, waiting patiently to tell its own story. It is the enduring heart of a nation, a house of stone that became a home for the soul of a people. The light is almost gone now. The tour groups have left, and a profound peace has settled over the valley once more. The air grows cool, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers. The first stars are appearing in the vast, deep blue sky overhead, the same stars that look down upon the king on his hill, the trader in the marketplace, and the woman stirring sadza by her hearth. You are alone now, with the immense silence of the sleeping city, the quiet hum of 1,000 years of history settling into the earth all around you, a final, gentle lullaby from the houses of stone. The soft shadows lengthen, and the great walls seem to merge back into the night, their secrets kept safe for another day. It is time now to rest. The echoes of the past are fading, becoming a gentle murmur, a soft whisper that rocks you slowly, gently toward sleep. The world of stone dissolves into the soft darkness, and you feel a sense of profound peace, a connection to the long, slow, patient rhythm of history. Everything is quiet. Everything is still. Sweet dreams.